Hey guys, tonight we're drifting gently into one of history's least relaxing vacation destinations, a quiet little monastery on the edge of the world right before it gets absolutely ruined by Vikings. Not the TV Vikings with perfect hair and slow-motion axes. I mean the real ones, cold, bored, underpaid seafaring men who looked at a peaceful island full of praying monks and thought, yeah, that looks lootable. So before we pillage your bedtime routine, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy this weird little corner of the internet. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is. Somehow it's always late, you're always tired, and history is always about to get worse. Now go ahead and dim the lights, turn on a fan, maybe one that rattles slightly so it sounds historically inaccurate. Get comfortable, tuck in, pretend your home is not on a windswept rock in the North Sea. And let's think for a moment. Have you ever wondered what life was like for a medieval monk whose biggest daily challenge was copying the letter A perfectly for 6 hours? What did you eat when silence was mandatory? How did you pass the time without podcasts? What was your plan if armed strangers appeared out of the fog? Did monasteries have an emergency drill for surprise longboats? And most importantly, would you personally survive even 5 minutes of 8th century Britain without immediately asking to go home? Because congratulations, you've just woken up on Lindisfarne. The year is 793. The air smells like salt, sheep, and holy devotion. You are barefoot, it's cold, and the horizon is about to get very, very crowded. You wake to the sound of wind scraping across stone and waves slapping the shore like they're impatient. Lindisfarne is peaceful in that aggressively lonely way, the kind of place where silence feels loud. Your bed is a wooden plank, your blanket is optimism, and the North Sea has opinions about your life choices. You try to stretch, but the cold seeps into your bones, and your toes feel like frozen sausages that forgot how to be toes. The floorboards creak with every cautious step, as if the monastery itself is whispering, "Be careful, you're already late for your misery." Outside, the sky is a soft grey, like someone poured a bucket of ash over the horizon and forgot to rinse it. Seagulls scream in the distance, sharp cries that feel like nature's version of an alarm clock you never signed up for. The smell of salt water mixes with the faint, ever-present aroma of sheep and candle smoke, a combination that is somehow both holy and vaguely suspicious. You realize that this is your morning soundtrack: wind, waves, sheep, and silence, punctuated by occasional judgmental bird screeches. You shuffle to the small window and peek outside. The cliffs drop off sharply into the North Sea, waves breaking against jagged rocks below. The water looks cold enough to kill a person instantly, which is probably historically accurate. You try to imagine jumping in, then immediately reconsider, because death might be easier than facing another day of chanting in frozen stone corridors. Your stomach rumbles. Breakfast, if it exists today, will likely consist of bread that could double as a building material and something that might vaguely resemble milk. You pause, letting the thought linger. Hunger is not urgent here because everything is slow, deliberate, and slightly miserable. Even your heartbeat seems to have adopted the monastery's rhythm, calm, patient, and slightly disappointed. As you gather your meagre belongings, a woolen cloak that smells faintly of sheep, a small wooden comb, and whatever hope you have left, you notice how the cold clings to your fingers. Everything feels like it's coated in frost, from your nails to your optimism. You press your hands together and try to summon warmth, realizing quickly that this is a futile exercise. The monastery, indifferent, continues to creak and sigh around you. You pass through the hallways, stone echoing beneath your bare feet. Candles flicker in sconces along the walls, their light casting long, twitching shadows that make even inanimate objects look like they have grievances against you. Somewhere in the distance, a fellow monk coughs, a sound that is both human and vaguely judgmental. You nod silently, because gestures are polite here, and words are expensive in both energy and patience. Eventually you reach the chapel. You kneel, not necessarily out of devotion, but because it seems like the safest position you can assume. The smell of incense, delicate, slightly acrid, fills your nostrils. You inhale slowly, letting the scent settle, a small comfort before the day inevitably becomes absurdly worse. Outside, the wind pushes against the monastery as if testing your resolve, and for the first time, you begin to suspect that the North Sea itself has a sense of humour. By now, your mind wanders. How did you get here? Couldn't you have chosen a sunnier, less violent profession? Does anyone else wake up with the weight of impending disaster hanging invisibly in the air? The answer is yes, but they are either asleep or pretending it doesn't exist. You straighten your back, prepare to face the day, and try not to think about the fact that within hours, the horizon might carry something that will make all of this seem quaint. Welcome to Lindisfarne. Your toes are cold, your bed was a lie, and the North Sea has plans for you. After surviving the morning chill, you settle into the monastery's daily rhythm, which is the human equivalent of slow-moving molasses. Life here revolves around three certainties: prayer, labour, and absolute rigid silence. The walls of Lindisfarne absorb every sound, echoing footsteps like tiny judgmental ghosts. Even your own breathing feels conspicuously loud in the hush, a personal reminder that you are very, very alive and very, very vulnerable. Your first task is prayer, which you perform in a group so synchronized it could be mistaken for a medieval flash mob if flash mobs involved chanting rather than dancing. The words are familiar, soothing, and occasionally exhausting. You chant in Latin, which makes your tongue feel simultaneously clumsy and noble. The rhythm is hypnotic, and if you let your mind wander, it can lull you into a trance, until your stomach reminds you that it exists, growling audibly in protest. Once the prayers are over, it's time for work. Today's assignment, tending to the monastery gardens. You walk outside and are greeted by a sea breeze that feels like it's actively judging your gardening skills. The soil is damp, the rocks are cold, and the tools are heavier than they have any right to be. You pull weeds, water herbs, and quietly curse the concept of farming in a climate that is just shy of hostile. It's physically taxing, oddly meditative, and infused with the faint thrill of knowing that if you accidentally damage something, the only consequence is shame, monastic shame, which is worse than a Viking raid in its subtlety. Mid-morning brings another prayer session, followed by copying texts in the scriptorium. The scriptorium is the holy office of medieval boredom. Long wooden benches, cold stone floors, and ink that seems to have its own opinion about your life choices. Each letter you carefully write feels like a tiny act of defiance against entropy. Mistakes are scraped off with painstaking effort, leaving your fingers perpetually ink-stained and your wrists suspiciously sore. You begin to understand why monks often develop the world's most impressive forearms. Between tasks, the monastery hums with quiet activity. Other monks move like shadows, sweeping, chopping, murmuring brief Latin phrases under their breath. Occasionally someone sneezes, and it sounds like a small explosion, a sudden break in the monastery's carefully constructed calm. You flinch instinctively. Silence here is sacred, and even minor disruptions feel like offences against the universe. By midday, hunger is a subtle, persistent companion. You make your way to the refectory, where the communal meal is more about sustenance than flavour. Bread is dense, porridge is lukewarm, and the occasional bit of cheese is suspiciously aromatic. Conversation is limited, a few quiet nods and murmured blessings. You chew thoughtfully because eating slowly is a survival strategy. It prolongs life and delays the inevitable fatigue from work and prayer. Afternoon brings more labour, tending to animals, repairing buildings, and hauling firewood. The North Sea wind doesn't let up. It sneaks into your sleeves, finds your collar, and generally makes itself known. Your hands are rough, your clothing damp, and your hair perpetually mussed by the elements. Yet there's a rhythm to it all, a strangely calming pattern of exertion punctuated by silent contemplation. As evening approaches, you gather for Vespers, chanting once more as the sun dips toward the horizon. The light slants across the cold stone, casting long, moving shadows. It's peaceful in a slightly unsettling way, like the calm before a storm, though today that storm is mostly metaphorical. You finish your day by walking back to your cell, feet cold, fingers ink-stained, and mind filled with thoughts both profound and absurd. The universe is vast, the sea is merciless, and you have exactly enough energy to collapse onto your plank of a bed and do it all again tomorrow. Life at Lindisfarne is extreme calm with a hint of existential terror, a meditation punctuated by work, prayer, and the ever-present possibility that history will intervene. You tuck in, close your eyes, and try not to think about the horizon, because today at least, nothing has attacked you yet. By the time morning chores and prayers have been carefully endured, it's time for breakfast. A meal so understated it could practically be invisible. You enter the refectory, a cold stone room lit by weak sunlight spilling through narrow windows. The air smells faintly of yesterday's porridge, dust, and the quiet judgment of centuries-old stone. A monk here takes breakfast seriously, which mostly means eating slowly and without enthusiasm, and perhaps silently calculating whether the bread is edible or just another historical artifact. You're handed a slice of bread that could double as a brick if the monastery suddenly needed repairs. It's dense, dry, and smells faintly of flour that's had a midlife crisis. There might be a bit of cheese or milk, but only if the cows decided to cooperate that morning, and their moods are notoriously capricious. You pick at it cautiously, aware that each bite is both sustenance and punishment. Somehow chewing takes longer than it should. Perhaps it's the bread, or perhaps it's the meditative state imposed by centuries of monastic routine. Around you, fellow monks eat in silence, their faces calm, their eyes distant. Occasionally a cough or the scraping of a chair breaks the hush, momentarily jolting everyone into awareness of their own physicality. The sound of gnawing bread is louder than expected, echoing in the stone halls like an understated symphony of necessity. You swallow slowly, imagining that somewhere in this room, someone is silently judging your technique. Perhaps you're not chewing reverently enough. Perhaps your posture is too modern. As you nibble, you notice the texture. It's hard, almost aerodynamic. One could hypothetically throw a slice across the refectory and hit a monk without it crumbling, an idea you wisely suppress. Occasionally, tiny insects, or what you hope are tiny insects, make a cameo in your bread. You choose to interpret them as protein because imagination is the only seasoning available in this setting. Hunger, it turns out, is the world's most effective flavour enhancer. The milk, if present, is lukewarm and slightly sour. It smells faintly of cow and wet hay, a fragrance that is both honest and entirely non-negotiable. You take a cautious sip, half expecting it to be a test of faith. Perhaps it is. Each swallow is a meditation on acceptance, accepting the cold, the damp, the boredom, and the fact that someone, centuries later, will read about this and think you were starving, when in reality you're merely chewing history. Breakfast is brief but ritualized. You pause after finishing to bow your head in thanks, not for flavor, not for delight, but for survival, and maybe for the small mercy of not having to fight anyone over the last slice. The room's silence resumes, as if nothing happened, as if the bread was not an obstacle course of starch and disappointment, as if your stomach's complaints are just internal chanting no one else hears. Afterward, you gather your things, adjust your robe, and step back into the cold morning air. Your stomach is full, if only in the sense that it no longer growls enough to make prayer impossible. Your fingers are still cold, your feet are still numb, and the horizon is still just over there, quietly threatening, whispering that while breakfast was safe, the day has not yet begun in earnest. In the quiet aftermath, you realize breakfast at Lindisfarne is not about taste. It is about rhythm, survival, and learning to be calm while chewing bread that might have outlived half the monks in your monastery. And somehow, against all odds, you feel a little ready for whatever comes next, though ready here is very, very relative. After breakfast, it's time to retreat to the scriptorium, the monastery's main event and the epicenter of both meditation and mild torment. You sit at a wooden desk that smells faintly of wax and old wood, its surface scarred by generations of monks who made the same mistakes you're about to make. Ink pots sit beside you, black and threatening, like tiny pools of permanent regret. The task? Copying texts, one painstaking letter at a time. The parchment is cold under your fingertips. Every stroke of the quill requires precision, concentration, and a near-religious commitment to patience. One slip, one blotch, and your carefully inscribed A might resemble an angry spider, instantly condemning you to an hour of scraping and restarting. You try to breathe steadily, but your heartbeat betrays you, a small drumbeat of panic echoing in the otherwise serene hall. The light from narrow windows casts thin shadows across your work, making the ink glint in ways that seem almost conspiratorial. You glance at the monk beside you, who is effortlessly producing perfect letters with the serenity of someone who has accepted their inevitable fate. You, by contrast, are wobbling between genius and disaster, each stroke a silent prayer that no one notices your hand is shaking. Time is measured differently here. Minutes stretch like taffy, each one filled with the scratch of quills, the shuffle of robes, and the occasional cough. You try to focus, and for brief moments, it works. The letters start to look like letters, and the words form sentences. Then a cold draft sneaks in, and your concentration collapses like a poorly constructed tent. You rub your hands together, hoping that warmth or divine intervention will help, but mostly just shiver and continue. Monastic silence has a weight of its own. Without conversation to distract you, you become acutely aware of every minor pain, your stiff neck, cramped fingers, and the creeping realization that you might be staring at the same page for hours. The rhythm of writing becomes hypnotic, almost soothing, until you glance at the clockless wall and realize an entire morning has passed. By noon, the scriptorium is both a temple of knowledge and a torture chamber of focus. You've produced a handful of letters that are technically correct, though perhaps slightly skewed toward the artistic abstract. Ink smudges on your fingertips, staining your skin like a subtle badge of honor or shame. Your back aches, your eyes are watery, and yet there is satisfaction in knowing that your work, flawed as it may be, contributes to the slow preservation of human knowledge. You look around. Other monks continue their labor, serenely calm, faces impassive. Occasionally, a quill snaps under pressure, the sound louder than a cannon in the silence, making everyone jump. You fight the urge to laugh or scream. Both are inappropriate, though one feels tempting. By mid-afternoon, you finally lean back, fingers sore, ink-stained, and oddly proud. The scriptorium has tested your patience, your dexterity, and your sanity, and you've survived. You might not have created a masterpiece, but you've upheld the rhythm of centuries, joining a lineage of people who endured cold, hunger, and the occasional quill-related injury for the sake of knowledge. And so you rise, stretch, and prepare for the next part of your day. Your soul might feel slightly depleted, but the quiet satisfaction of surviving hours of repetitive labour without screaming into the stone walls gives a tiny spark of hope. After all, in Lindisfarne, endurance is both survival and art. As you step outside after hours of scriptorium labour, the weather greets you like an old friend who is aggressively passive-aggressive. Wind whips across the cliffs, carrying salt spray that stings your face and makes your eyes water. The North Sea isn't just a body of water. It is a living, judgmental entity, and you feel like it personally dislikes your choices in life. The cold is relentless. It seeps into every seam of your clothing, sneaks under your sleeves, and pinches your ears until they feel like frozen biscuits. Even your shadow shivers against the monastery walls. It's not the kind of cold that politely nudges you awake. It's the kind that lingers, whispers pessimistic thoughts, and makes you reconsider the wisdom of ever leaving the scriptorium. Clouds hang low, heavy, and ominous, pressing down on the island as if they're in a constant bad mood. Rain is a frequent guest, falling sideways when the wind decides it's being dramatic. You learn to adjust your steps, brace against gusts, and mentally apologize to your hair for the inevitable mess. Nature here is not a backdrop. It is a character with a particularly biting sense of humor. Even simple tasks like gathering herbs or sweeping pathways are subtly complicated by weather's whims. One moment the ground is slick with rain, the next gusts threaten to sweep your hat into the sea. The monks handle it stoically, as if enduring wind and cold is an essential part of spiritual growth. You handle it by muttering quietly under your breath, which is technically unspiritual but extremely human. Birds, usually a soothing presence, scream and dart in patterns that suggest they are conspiring against you. The smell of wet stone and salt mixes with the faint tang of distant seaweed, creating a sensory cocktail that is invigorating, unsettling, and vaguely punishing. You realize the weather is not just background, it is a relentless participant in the monastery's daily drama. By late afternoon, you accept that the weather will not improve, and perhaps it should not. It keeps you humble, alert, and just slightly terrified of nature's whims. You tuck your hands under your arms, take a deep breath, and move on to the next chore, aware that the North Sea and its sky are judging you continuously, and somehow you find that oddly comforting. As you wander the monastery grounds, it becomes painfully obvious. Lindisfarne has about as many defences as a teabag has teeth. There are no walls, no towers, no watchtowers. Nothing between you and the North Sea except a few monks and an optimistic attitude. The island sits quietly, confidently believing that piety alone is a formidable deterrent. You briefly wonder who approved this security plan and if their tenure was cut short by reality. The wooden gates are small, decorative, and about as sturdy as a stale loaf of bread. They creak ominously in the wind, suggesting they could barely stop a strong breeze, let alone an actual threat. You imagine a Viking longship approaching, and the gates politely saying, "Please come in," before surrendering without a fight. A cold shiver runs down your spine, though whether it's from fear or the ever-present North Sea wind, you cannot tell. Inside the monastery, the monks move about calmly, unaware, or blissfully in denial of how defenceless they are. They pray, tend the gardens, and copy texts, performing tasks that are soothing in theory and terrifying in practice. You realize that faith has replaced fortifications here, which is excellent if you enjoy living dangerously optimistic lives. It's a comfort only until someone who doesn't care about your prayers shows up at your doorstep. You glance at the horizon, imagining intruders scaling cliffs with alarming ease. The monastery is picturesque, yes, but also a sitting duck. The tide laps against the rocks like it's conspiring with fate, carrying with it a subtle message. Nature is powerful, humans are fragile, and faith is not armor. The island feels calm now, almost smug in its peacefulness, completely unaware of the impending chaos that history will deliver. The more you look, the more you appreciate the architectural choices, or lack thereof. Every structure seems chosen for aesthetic tranquility rather than practical survival. Stone walls are low, doorways are narrow, and windows are mere slits that would barely slow down a determined intruder. You begin to suspect that monks were excellent at creating quiet beauty, but had little interest in planning for people who wielded axes and had terrible intentions. As you pace along the shore, watching gulls dive and caw, you realize there is a strange serenity in the monastery's naivete. They live unburdened by fortifications, unencumbered by suspicion, and almost entirely dependent on the idea that no one in their right mind would attack holy people. You make a mental note. Optimism is admirable, but maybe invest in a few archers, or at least a guard dog next time. By evening, you feel a mixture of awe and apprehension. The island is stunning, the monastery serene, and yet every stone whispers a warning. It is an idyllic trap, a peaceful paradise that history will exploit with ruthless efficiency. You tuck this thought away for later, along with a prayer that your luck holds, until dusk, and perhaps even beyond, though the horizon looks ominously empty. For now you breathe in the crisp sea air, feel the wind tug at your robes, and appreciate that tranquility can be both beautiful and terrifying, especially when it comes with zero actual defences. Lindisfarne may look like heaven on earth, but you understand deep down that its calm is dangerously fragile. News from the mainland arrives slowly, like a tired courier trudging through mud. Occasionally, travellers, merchants, or wandering monks bring tales of distant raids and strange northern ships that move with unnatural speed. You listen politely, nodding and murmuring the right prayers, all while wondering if anyone really expects you to take action. The stories are vague but unsettling. Longships appearing out of nowhere, bearded warriors with sharp axes, and villages stripped bare. The traveller's eyes widen as they describe events, their hands gesturing like air conductors. You, however, are stuck in a monastery where the only weapons are prayer books and spatulas for bread. You quietly hope they're exaggerating. Surely this is someone else's problem. These rumours hover in the air like a faint, unpleasant scent. They seep into conversations that never really happen, and into your dreams when you attempt to nap after chores. The monks continue their daily routines, serene and seemingly impervious to panic, while you start to feel the first prickles of unease. The horizon suddenly seems a little sharper, a little more suspicious. You imagine scenarios that feel absurd in theory, but terrifying in practice. A fleet of longships, axes glinting in the cold sunlight, crashing through your idyllic island, sending manuscripts flying into the waves. Even the thought makes your stomach tighten. Your mind wanders to the idea that faith alone may not be enough if someone actually decides that Holy Island equals free loot. By the end of the day, the rumours become background music, a faint constant reminder that peace is a fragile, easily shattered construct. You return to your cell, quietly debating whether to mention the stories during Vespers. You decide against it because raising alarm is gauche, unspiritual, and frankly exhausting. Instead, you whisper a silent prayer for divine intervention, or at least for the North Sea to develop a personal vendetta against intruders. The mainland rumours are subtle, like a distant drumbeat. but they mark the first sense that Lindisfarne's isolated calm may be temporary. You feel a mix of dread and curiosity, the kind that keeps eyes flicking toward the horizon, even as your hands fold in silent prayer. Something is coming, you can sense it, but for now, life continues. One careful, cold, and slightly anxious step at a time. The sea is never quiet, even on a calm day. It stretches endlessly, grey and restless, a liquid expanse that feels both comforting and threatening. It brings fish, yes, and the occasional shipment of supplies, but also rumours, travellers, and sometimes worse, things that smell faintly like trouble. You step closer to the shore and feel the cold wind whip salt into your face, reminding you that the North Sea has opinions about who belongs on its edges. From here, the waves look deceptively serene. Seagulls wheel above, cawing in a language that seems critical of your life choices. The horizon shimmers with heat, cold, and possibility, though mostly cold. Boats bob in the distance, tiny silhouettes that could carry friendly traders or unwelcome strangers. You realise that the sea is Lindisfarne's highway, pantry, and scoreboard all at once. It delivers sustenance, news, and occasionally chaos in equal measure. The smell of salt water mixes with the faint perfume of seaweed and wet stone. It is refreshing, yet slightly menacing, like a scented warning. You can hear the water slapping against the rocks, each wave a quiet percussion marking time and reminding you that despite centuries of peace, the world outside this monastery is messy, unpredictable, and occasionally deadly. Fishing is part of daily life. Nets, lines, and traps require attention, and the sea obliges with occasional generosity or mockery. You've learned that the fish arrive on their own schedule, not yours, and patience is a skill honed by hunger, cold, and the occasional pang of despair. Even a small catch is celebrated quietly, with murmured thanks to God and a private internal cheer. The sea also carries news, arriving in the form of sailors, pilgrims, or wandering merchants who speak in hurried tones about distant raids, strange ships, and the growing boldness of northern warriors. You listen carefully, nodding along, while your stomach tightens with a mix of curiosity and dread. Every story floats in like a bottle, sealed with a hint of doom. Storms are another matter entirely. The sea transforms from a lazy highway into a grey monster, whipping waves into frenzy, lashing wind across the cliffs, and generally reminding you that Lindisfarne is just a speck of stone and faith against a vast, uncaring world. Even the hardiest monks pause, hands clasped in prayer, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble, or divine approval, whichever comes first. And yet, there is calm within this chaos. You watch the waves, rhythmic and relentless, and feel a strange meditative comfort. The sea teaches endurance. Wait, observe, and accept that you cannot control everything. Sometimes it brings food, sometimes it brings letters, sometimes it brings strangers with axes. The lesson is simple. Respect it, fear it slightly, and remember that survival is mostly about patience and cleverness. By evening, you step back from the shore, clothes damp from sea spray, hair clinging to your forehead, and lungs filled with briny air. The horizon darkens, and the waves continue their constant conversation with the rocks. You feel a mixture of awe, dread, and calm, acceptance. The sea is everything Lindisfarne depends on, and everything it fears. It is beautiful, violent, patient, and timeless, an eternal reminder that life at the edge of the world is never boring. The bells ring softly, calling you and your fellow monks to the chapel. Their tones are gentle but insistent, echoing across the stone halls like a soft warning. You fold your hands, kneel, and take your place among the familiar faces, the quiet rhythm of communal devotion wrapping around you like a protective cloak. This is peace. This is routine. This is before the world reminds you how fragile tranquility really is. The chants begin, steady and calm, rising in a wave of sound that drowns out the wind and the sea. Each syllable, measured and precise, feels like it slows time, like you're suspended in a bubble of faith and incense. Your throat aches from repetition, your knees stiff from kneeling, but your mind is oddly serene. The North Sea, the wind, the looming horizon, none of it seems important here. You notice the little details, the flicker of candlelight across a monk's face, the faint scent of beeswax, the subtle creak of wooden floors beneath kneeling bodies. Each element blends into a tapestry of calm that is both hypnotic and grounding. In these moments, the world seems slow, manageable, even safe, and yet there is a tension underlying the serenity, like a taut string ready to snap. You feel it in the air, in the way the wind bends around the chapel, and in the faint unease that whispers through your thoughts. History has a sense of timing, and for Lindisfarne, the lesson is about to arrive. You whisper silent prayers for peace, for safety, and for guidance. Outside, the waves crash as if punctuating your words, reminding you that the island exists within a larger, unpredictable world. The morning passes, slow and deliberate, a calm before a storm you cannot yet see. Your mind drifts to mundane worries, chores unfinished, ink-stained hands, and the odd ache in your knees. Yet these concerns are trivial in comparison to the unknown that hovers beyond the horizon. Still, the repetition of prayer, the unity of voice, and the shared devotion create a buffer against anxiety. For now, you are protected by routine, by ritual, and by the fragile illusion of safety. As the service concludes, you rise with a sense of temporary relief. The calm has not ended, it has merely paused. Outside, the wind continues its judgment, the sea its eternal conversation, and the horizon remains distant and silent. But for this brief period, morning prayers have given you a fragile armour of peace, readying you for whatever events the day may bring. You are tending to your daily chores, hands chilled and stiff from the early morning when someone points out to the horizon. At first you think it's just a trick of the light, a ripple on the water, or perhaps a floating log. But no, there, cutting through the grey sea like knives through parchment, are shapes unmistakably deliberate. Long, narrow silhouettes, slicing through the waves with purpose. Your stomach lurches. Something about their rhythm, their speed, their ominous symmetry, whispers, this is not friendly. The island feels suddenly smaller. The monastery, which seemed so safe moments ago, is exposed, fragile, and absurdly unprepared. You squint, trying to assess the situation, and realize these vessels are longships, sleek, low, and unnervingly quiet for their size. The sails flap slightly in the wind, as if teasing the shore, announcing their presence in a way that feels almost sentient. You wonder briefly whether the sea is playing a cruel joke. Other monks gather silently, faces pale and expressions carefully neutral. Perhaps it is a spiritual exercise in denial, or perhaps centuries of calm have taught them that outward panic is unholy. You nod politely, though your hands are trembling. One monk whispers something about traders. Traders, right. Traders who arrive in numbers large enough to make an entire island nervous and seem to have an unhealthy fascination with axes. You watch as the ships glide closer, water parting around their hulls in a slow, deliberate pattern. The horizon, once a comforting expanse, now feels like a trap closing around you. Every instinct in your body screams, run, hide, pray louder, anything. But you remain frozen because centuries of routine do not include escape drills. The North Sea wind ruffles your robes and you feel it is mocking you just a little. The sound of the ship's oars slicing through water grows louder, rhythmic and ominous. a percussion that feels like a countdown. Seagulls scatter, screaming as if they know something you do not. Somewhere in the back of your mind you consider shouting a warning, but the words stick in your throat. History has a sense of timing, and apparently today is a day for dramatic entrance. The first captain appears at the prow of a ship, his silhouette framed by grey waves. Bearded, confident and armed, he surveys the island with the kind of casual entitlement only a person with no moral compass and an axe can have. You feel your heart tighten. This is the moment the world quietly shifts, the thin line between serene monotony and absolute chaos about to be crossed. You glance at the monks around you. Some pray silently, others glance toward their work, pretending competence. You realize there is a strange, fragile solidarity forming among you, a silent acknowledgement that whatever happens, it happens together. The horizon is no longer just distant water, it is the beginning of history intervening personally, for all the wrong reasons. For a moment time seems suspended. The wind howls, the waves crash, and the ships move steadily forward, their purpose undeniable. You take a deep, shivering breath, preparing yourself for a reality you've only ever read about in rumours or chroniclers' tales. This is no longer theory. This is now. History, as you realise, is arriving at Lindisfarne in long, narrow packages of timber and intent, and it does not care if you are ready. The first sighting sends a ripple through the monks, a mixture of disbelief and cognitive dissonance. Surely these are traders, merchants, or pilgrims who took a wrong turn somewhere. It cannot possibly be an attack. After all, who would raid a monastery? Who would interrupt centuries of quiet devotion for gold, silver, or sacred manuscripts? Rational thought in this moment is as fragile as the bread you ate for breakfast. You watch the long ships approach, oars glinting wet in the muted sunlight. Your rational brain searches desperately for explanations. Perhaps it's a ceremonial visit, maybe a misunderstanding, or possibly the monks of the mainland are conducting an extreme spiritual exercise. You nod to yourself, repeating quiet affirmations that the ships are harmless, hoping that belief can alter reality. The monks move with a strange calm, their expressions neutral as if to shield themselves from panic. Denial here is both an art and a survival strategy. You join in, muttering silent prayers, convincing yourself that fear is unspiritual and panic unholy. Still, the tightening in your chest refuses to be ignored. As the vessels draw closer, small details emerge, shields glinting along the rails, figures leaning forward with practiced precision, and the unmistakable impression that someone, somewhere, is very excited to be here. And you, unfortunately, are their destination. Optimism flickers weakly. Maybe they'll just take some supplies and leave. Maybe this is all a misunderstanding. Maybe the sea will intervene. For now, all you can do is watch, breathe, and maintain an air of calm that feels performative but necessary. Your stomach knots, your hands are cold, and your mind races through centuries of monastic training that did not include imminent raid survival. The horizon has changed. It is no longer distant and serene. It is immediate, threatening, and historically significant. You take a slow, deliberate breath. Perhaps it is fear. Perhaps it is acceptance. Perhaps it is a combination of exhaustion and awe. Whatever it is, it sets the stage for the day to come, a day that will forever mark Lindisfarne in both history books and nightmares. The longships glide silently onto the shore, their hulls scraping against the sand with a sound that feels like inevitability. You watch in frozen disbelief as the figures disembark, boots crunching on rocks, axes gleaming, hair and beards wild with wind and purpose. They move like a storm incarnate, confident and utterly unbothered by centuries of monastic calm. This is no ceremonial visit. This is history hitting Lindisfarne in person. You glance at the monks around you. Some freeze, eyes wide. Others bow their heads in silent prayer, as if devotion alone might serve as armour. Your stomach churns. The North Sea, which has seemed like a neutral observer, now feels like an accomplice, carrying these intruders effortlessly across the water to disrupt your life in ways that were previously theoretical. The Vikings spread out with military precision. Shields are raised, spears brandished, and axes polished for practical effect, not decoration. Every step they take exudes confidence and expectation. You, meanwhile, shuffle backward, tripping over stone paths and whispering frantic prayers. They do not notice you, not yet, but you notice them. You notice their focus, their purpose, and the terrifying enthusiasm that comes with someone who believes the world exists solely to be looted. The monastery's bells ring, a desperate alarm, but it's mostly ornamental in effect. There is no force here to resist them, just a handful of monks armed with faith, determination, and whatever kitchen implements are nearby. Your mind races. Could you swing a ladle? Could a broom count as a weapon? The ideas are absurd, the logic flawed, and yet the desperation is very, very real. One Viking steps forward, scanning the buildings with a look of satisfaction. He is inspecting his prize, assessing the layout of centuries of quiet devotion, and deciding which objects will become loot and which will serve as entertainment. You feel a cold wave of dread wash over you. The calm of Lindisfarne has evaporated in an instant, replaced by the practical reality of survival, although you're not sure how practical a monk's survival plan is in this scenario. Some monks stand paralyzed, hands folded, hoping invisibility might work, or perhaps that divine intervention will manifest quickly. Others attempt to herd treasures, sacred objects, and manuscripts into safer corners, though the Vikings' eyes are already everywhere. Time seems suspended. Seconds stretch like elastic as chaos quietly takes shape around you. The first sounds of violence echo across the courtyard. A shouted command, the clash of metal, and the terrified cries of people and animals alike. You notice small details, the glint of sunlight on polished axes, the flash of shield edges, the ripple of panic moving like a wave through the monastery's stone halls. You realize that centuries of peace and calm are utterly irrelevant here. History does not negotiate. Yet even in this chaos, the human instinct to survive persists. You duck behind a wall, clutching a book so sacred you almost hope it will protect you. Somewhere behind you, a monk prays louder than usual. A Viking laughs, a sharp, confident sound that seems to mock both faith and fear. The day has begun in earnest, and nothing will ever be the same. Lindisfarne is no longer a quiet island at the edge of the world. It is a stage, a battlefield, and a witness to the kind of history that changes everything in minutes. And you, barefoot and trembling, are right in the middle of it. The initial moments of the raid are a blur of noise, motion, and disbelief. Your mind struggles to process what is happening. Shock, you realize, might be the only survival strategy available. Moving, acting, or thinking too quickly could attract attention, and the North Sea has already delivered enough chaos to make a single misstep potentially fatal. Every sound is amplified. The clatter of shields, the scrape of axes, the frightened screams of fellow monks. The monastery, previously a sanctuary of calm, is now a chaotic theatre of violence. You feel your heart hammering in your chest, and yet your body is frozen in a mix of terror and disbelief. It is oddly functional. Shock allows you to breathe, to hide, and to observe, all at the same time. You notice the Vikings moving methodically, almost professionally, taking exactly what they want and leaving the rest for later assessment. Their confidence is unnerving, their energy inexhaustible. Every gesture is purposeful, from the way they survey the room to the precision with which they grab sacred objects. You realize that centuries of routine and prayer have not prepared you for this, and that improvisation is not your strong suit. Time dilates. Moments stretch like taffy as you assess escape routes, hiding spots, and potential tools of defense. Your brain latches onto small details: a loose floorboard, a half-open door, a stack of manuscripts that could serve as a temporary shield. Everything is simultaneously useful and absurd. You feel like you are in a nightmare painted in remarkably realistic colours. Despite fear, survival instincts awaken. You slip behind pillars, duck into corners, and whisper desperate prayers that seem as fragile as the walls around you. The monks who remain standing either pray fervently or move with deliberate calm, understanding intuitively that panic could be fatal. Your shock, in contrast, is messy but effective. It allows you to exist in the moment without making any critical errors, so far. Every glance toward the intruders reminds you of the North Sea's dual nature, once comforting, now complicit in delivering calamity. Waves crash in the distance, indifferent and eternal, while the monastery burns quietly with human chaos. You realize that the calm you took for granted is gone, replaced by adrenaline, fear, and the faint absurd hope that you might survive. Shock, you decide, is a temporary armor. It doesn't protect you physically, but it grants clarity of observation, the ability to move subtly, and the mental bandwidth to plan, just enough to navigate the day that is already slipping into history's annals as one of the most infamous moments the island will ever witness. You've survived the initial shock, ducked behind a pile of manuscripts, and are now forced to ask the obvious question: what exactly do these people want? It's not conversation. It's not tea. It's not a friendly tour of Lindisfarne's serene gardens. No, the Vikings are here for something much more practical: loot, gold, and whatever else looks like it might make a satisfying noise when swung or carried away. They move with an unsettling efficiency, scanning each room like students searching for the cheat sheet they were promised. Sacred relics, manuscripts, and precious metals are collected without hesitation. Every item has value, either spiritual or monetary, and the Vikings treat both with the same gleeful disregard for propriety. You peek around a corner, realizing that your careful devotion to monastic preservation has made you both an observer and an accidental participant in history. Some objects are handled delicately, as if the raiders understand the difference between fragile and worthless. A golden chalice glints in the torchlight, held carefully, admired briefly, then shoved into a sack. Meanwhile, parchment scrolls and inked manuscripts are torn from shelves, rolled up and tossed aside if they seem insignificant or suspiciously heavy. You begin to understand that their priorities are simple, practical, and terrifying. Value equals volume, multiplied by portability, with a side of intimidation. Amid this chaos, you notice small human details. One Viking pauses to pocket a loaf of bread, another laughs at a monk trying to protest in Latin. Even in this violence, there is absurdity, a reminder that humanity, for all its cruelty, is occasionally comically mundane. You can't help but observe, silent and frozen, as centuries of sacred work are appraised, evaluated, and relocated with astonishing speed. The raiders move through the monastery like a force of nature, brushing past centuries of calm and devotion without a thought. Your mind spins as you attempt to reconcile the serenity you knew with this whirlwind of efficiency and menace. The sacred objects, the quiet halls, the carefully tended gardens, all of it is temporarily repurposed in the service of Viking priorities. You notice the monks who attempt to resist, not with arms, because that would be futile, but with small, futile gestures of preservation. A whispered protest, a hand clinging to a manuscript, a prayer offered with intensity that borders on panic. You admire their courage, even as you recognize the absurdity of resistance in the face of such organized chaos. By the time the Vikings finish inspecting the monastery, the pattern is clear. They are thorough, calculating, and terrifyingly competent. Nothing that can be taken is overlooked. You realize the lesson is simple. The world does not care for peace, devotion, or preparation. It rewards action, decisiveness, and sometimes sheer audacity. And yet, despite the terror, there is a strange rhythm to the chaos. The monastery's walls echo with purposeful motion, not just violence. You feel a faint, uncomfortable admiration for the raiders' efficiency, even as your instinct for survival reminds you to stay quiet, still, and unnoticed. Lindisfarne, for all its calm and beauty, has been thoroughly assessed, its treasures catalogued by hands that do not hesitate. By the end of it, you are exhausted, trembling, and strangely aware of how fragile routine and order truly are. The Vikings have made their desires abundantly clear, and the monastery is now a canvas on which history is painting its most dramatic strokes. You tuck yourself behind a pillar, holding your breath, and prepare for whatever comes next. Because at Lindisfarne, even survival is just the beginning of the story. While the chaos rages around the monastery, the Nuns of Lindisfarne display a kind of quiet heroism, or perhaps audacious absurdity, that even the Vikings do not anticipate. They move with a mixture of fear, resolve, and subtle cunning, their actions guided by centuries of discipline and a remarkable ability to remain calm in the face of impending doom. You watch from your hiding spot, realizing that their composure is both impressive and unsettling. Some nuns attempt to shield sacred objects, rolling manuscripts into their arms like fragile children. Others shout instructions in clipped tones, corralling novices into safer corners of the monastery, all while keeping one eye on the approaching intruders. Their movements are precise, deliberate, and somehow rhythmic, a counterpoint to the Vikings' chaotic efficiency. You feel a pang of admiration, though you're careful not to breathe too loudly. Humour, oddly enough, is present even here. One nun slips a particularly suspicious loaf of bread into her robe, muttering that if the invaders want food, they can at least take it politely. Another silently gestures toward a treasured chalice with a look that could be interpreted as "good luck, idiots," a small act of resistance disguised as civility. Their wit is subtle but effective, creating a mental buffer between terror and action. Even in the face of fear, the nuns maintain their routines, however adapted. Chanting continues, soft and deliberate, echoing faintly through the stone corridors. It is a quiet defiance, a reminder that sacred practices persist, even when the world outside collapses. You notice that the rhythm of prayer seems to protect not just their spirits, but also the fragile equilibrium of the moment, like a heartbeat keeping panic at bay. Some nuns take more practical measures, barricading doors with furniture, shoving heavy objects into the path of anyone reckless enough to pursue them, and signalling allies with subtle gestures. You realize that survival in this context is not about confrontation, but clever improvisation, and the nuns excel at it. Their calm is strategic, their fear measured, and their courage quietly brilliant. Amid the terror, there are glimpses of absurdity. A Viking attempts to grab an object, only to be met with a perfectly timed spit of holy water. Another slips on a wet stone, startling both raider and victim alike. Chaos in the hands of clever defenders can be a tool as much as it is a threat. You watch, heart in your throat, as moments of unintentional comedy slice through the tension like a knife through butter. By the end of the initial encounter, the nuns have preserved more than a few sacred items and thwarted several attempts at indiscriminate looting. Their composure is impressive, bordering on miraculous. You are struck by the lesson. Courage is not always loud, resistance is not always violent, and sometimes calm wit is as effective as steel. As the Vikings pause to assess their hall, the nuns regroup, silent but unbroken. The monastery, though shaken, retains a fragile sense of order. You, tucked away behind a pillar, feel a strange mix of awe and relief. In this moment, you realize that history is not just about destruction. It is also about the remarkable resilience of ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. The Vikings move through Lindisfarne with a precision that is at once terrifying and baffling. They grab what they deem valuable: gold, silver, and religious artifacts. Yet occasionally, their choices seem peculiar. One raider scoops up a stack of parchment scrolls, then sets them down moments later, shaking his head as if deciding that sacred knowledge is somehow less satisfying than a barrel of salted fish. You watch, perplexed, noting that human priorities have always been wonderfully inconsistent. Some items vanish into sacks without question, a chalice here, a reliquary there, while other treasures are passed over, ignored, or accidentally knocked over. You notice one Viking holding a loaf of bread as if it were a crown jewel, inspecting it closely before popping it into his bag with a triumphant nod. Hunger, practicality, or simple absurdity, you cannot tell. The line between strategy and whimsy is surprisingly thin. Monks and nuns alike move cautiously, hoping that valuable objects are preserved, while simultaneously navigating the chaos. You notice that some sacred objects are unintentionally spared because the raiders simply do not recognize their value. A tiny wooden crucifix, for example, remains untouched, wedged in a corner, while gold-plated items are swept away. You realize that history often depends on the whims of those who least respect it. The raiders' behavior is a mix of efficiency and randomness. Manuscripts are ripped from shelves, yet some get tossed aside for being too heavy. Liturgical garments are carried off, sometimes discarded when a more visually impressive item appears. It is a process both methodical and capricious, demonstrating a strange logic that is terrifying in its unpredictability. You cannot help but observe, hidden behind a pillar, how absurdly human this destruction is. Despite the violence, there are small moments of unintentional comedy. One Viking trips over a chair, sending a jug of water flying, soaking a fellow raider who responds with a startled yelp. Another struggles with a particularly stubborn chest, muttering curses, while a monk quietly prays that the lid will crush the intruder. The tension is sharp, but interspersed with these small absurdities, your heart occasionally leaps in startled amusement. You notice that some of the loot is immediately tested. A monk's silverware is dropped onto the floor, rings clink against the stone, and coins are weighed by hand. There is a rhythm to this chaos, almost musical in its randomness. You begin to appreciate, in a twisted way, the creativity and resourcefulness of the invaders, though you are also acutely aware that their success depends entirely on your inability to stop them. By the time the raiders pause to assess their haul, it is clear that they have taken a mix of items with practical, monetary, and mysterious significance. You reflect that history is often dictated not by logic or justice, but by whoever shows up first and has the loudest voice or the sharpest axe. As the last sacks are lifted and the Vikings retreat to their ships, you breathe a quiet sigh. The monastery is battered, sacred items are scattered, and the calm of Lindisfarne has been irreversibly altered. Yet you cannot help but marvel at the strange priorities of your visitors, a mix of calculated efficiency, whimsy, and curiosity that ensures history remembers this day as both tragic and oddly absurd. The raid ends as abruptly as it began, leaving Lindisfarne in a state of eerie silence. You emerge slowly from your hiding place, limbs stiff, heart still racing, and eyes adjusting to a world that now looks slightly foreign. The monastery, once orderly and serene, is a scattered tableau of overturned furniture, missing treasures, and parchment strewn like autumn leaves. The aftermath is strangely calm, yet every corner whispers of the chaos that has passed. Monks and nuns begin moving carefully, assessing the damage and retrieving what can be salvaged. Sacred texts are picked up, dusted off, and rolled back into fragile piles. You notice their movements are deliberate, almost ritualized, a combination of grief, relief, and sheer determination. Every salvaged item is a small victory against the randomness of history. Some items are lost forever, whisked away in sacks by the departing Vikings, leaving empty shelves and a hollow sense of absence. Others remain, protected by coincidence or oversight, their survival a small miracle in the face of human disorder. You watch as a nun carefully cradles a delicate manuscript, whispering quiet thanks as if speaking aloud might summon the North Sea to take it away again. The monks quietly reorganize what remains, carefully stacking objects, inspecting damage, and noting items that require repair. There is no panic, only the calm, methodical rhythm of those who understand that life must continue, regardless of theft, destruction, or absurdity. You feel the odd comfort of routine returning, even as the shadow of the raid lingers in every stone wall and gust of wind. You notice small acts of ingenuity, manuscripts wedged behind furniture to keep them safe, sacred vessels tucked into robes, and even some raided food items returned to the kitchen for later use. Survival, it seems, is about resourcefulness as much as courage. You quietly admire the monks and nuns for their clever improvisation, even if the circumstances that require it are grim. The atmosphere is solemn but tinged with dry humour. One monk mutters about the Viking efficiency team under his breath, eliciting a faint smirk from a nearby nun. Even in the aftermath of terror, the human instinct to comment wryly on absurdity persists. You realise that resilience often comes with small, private moments of humour, the kind that no invader can fully erase. By the end of the day, the monastery begins to regain a semblance of order. Damage is noted, losses counted, and prayers whispered, not just for protection, but for patience, wisdom, and perhaps a little luck next time. The calm after the storm is fragile, but it is real. The monks and nuns have survived, preserved what they can, and quietly asserted that life continues, even in the aftermath of violence. You step back, taking in the scene. Lindisfarne is battered, but not broken. The stones still stand, the manuscripts are partially safe, and the people who call this place home remain surprisingly composed. For now, the immediate danger has passed, and there is space to breathe, reflect, and begin the slow process of rebuilding. As the initial adrenaline fades, the monks and nuns begin the delicate task of tallying what was lost, and surprisingly, what was left behind. There is a rhythm to this work, eyes scanning shelves, hands brushing dust from sacred pages, and whispered exchanges about the curious priorities of the raiders. Each recovered manuscript, chalice, or even half-eaten loaf of bread becomes a tiny triumph against history's chaos. You notice the peculiar contrast between what was taken and what survived. A gold reliquary might be gone, but a modest wooden crucifix remains perched on a shelf, untouched. A pile of old, brittle parchments, seemingly worthless, is still there, while a recently polished chalice has vanished. History, it seems, has a sense of irony, and you are painfully aware that survival often depends on randomness as much as courage. The monks move deliberately, their calm punctuated by occasional dry commentary. One mutters that the Vikings had questionable taste, earning a subtle chuckle from a nearby nun. Even amid loss, there is room for understated humour, a gentle reminder that absurdity often accompanies tragedy. You feel a faint warmth in your chest, grateful for this blend of practicality and wit. Some nuns take inventory with meticulous care, documenting what can be replaced or restored, and noting items that are permanently lost. The process is quiet but exacting, an exercise in patience and precision. You realize that in the face of destruction, human resilience often reveals itself in these small, careful acts rather than grand gestures. You also notice unexpected victories. One monk found an entire shelf of manuscripts that had been overlooked, and another retrieved a small treasure hidden behind a pile of debris that even the Vikings had ignored. These minor successes feel disproportionately satisfying, like finding an extra fry at the bottom of a fast food bag after a terrible day. Each small triumph is a reminder that the world still contains room for luck, ingenuity, and quiet relief. The air is thick with a mixture of dust, wet stone, and faint incense. You move carefully between the recovering monks and nuns, observing their blend of efficiency and exhaustion. There is no dramatic celebration, just a quiet, steady determination that life must continue. You find yourself impressed by their ability to maintain composure while simultaneously grieving, laughing, and planning repairs. By evening, the full scope of the losses and survival is clear. Valuable items are gone, sacred spaces disrupted, yet the core of Lindisfarne remains intact. The people, their routines, and their resilience. You sense a profound truth. Survival is not about everything going perfectly. It is about enduring, adapting, and finding small moments of victory even in chaos. You take a moment to breathe, watching monks and nuns organize, tally, and quietly smile at small victories. In a world suddenly turned upside down, these odd triumphs feel like precious jewels. Lindisfarne has been tested, and while the scars are real, so is the quiet resilience that will carry the island forward. The sun dips low over Lindisfarne, casting long shadows across the monastery's battered stone walls. The chaos of the day has faded into a hushed stillness, punctuated only by the occasional creak of wood, the distant slap of the sea, and the soft murmurs of monks and nuns tending to what remains. You sit quietly, letting the cool evening air brush your face and begin to reflect on everything that has transpired. Despite the destruction, there is a strange serenity in the aftermath. The monastery may be bruised, but its walls still stand, its people still breathe, and small victories have been claimed. Manuscripts are carefully restacked, minor treasures preserved, and lessons quietly absorbed. You realize that life, even after a violent interruption, continues with remarkable steadiness. The nuns move gracefully through the dim light, securing objects and whispering prayers that rise and fall like soft music. Their calm contrasts sharply with the chaos of the earlier hours, creating a rhythm that is oddly soothing. You notice that humour has returned as well. Small, understated jokes whispered between colleagues, the kind that only people who have narrowly survived can appreciate. It is a gentle reminder that even in devastation, human spirits remain stubbornly irrepressible. You think about the Vikings, their odd priorities, and the absurdity of their raid. A loaf of bread treasured, a priceless relic ignored. It is a strange, darkly comedic balance, and you allow yourself a quiet smile at the ridiculousness of history. Even when people act with terrifying efficiency, there is still room for unpredictability and humour in their choices. The smell of the sea mingles with the faint scent of candles and incense, creating a sensory backdrop that is both grounding and reflective. You inhale slowly, letting the air fill your lungs, and consider the day's lessons. Preparedness matters. Courage comes in many forms, and the smallest acts of cleverness can make the difference between loss and survival. You notice monks quietly mending torn robes, arranging displaced furniture, and checking on fellow brethren. Each action is methodical, calm, and infused with care. The quiet diligence is mesmerizing, and you feel yourself settling into a reflective, almost meditative state. Even the shadows seem softer now, less like threats and more like witnesses to resilience. By the time night fully settles, Lindisfarne has regained a fragile equilibrium. The chaos of the day lingers as a memory, but it no longer dominates. You feel a sense of cautious optimism. The island has been tested, its people challenged, and yet the monastery endures. You allow yourself a final slow breath, appreciating the calm that follows survival, the subtle humour in hindsight, and the quiet strength of those who continue despite it all. Evening falls like a gentle blanket, and you realise that for now, the world outside can wait. Lindisfarne's inhabitants, scarred but steadfast, carry the day forward with dignity, wit, and an unshakable rhythm of life. You settle into that calm, letting it seep into your body and mind, ready to drift toward rest, reflection, and eventually sleep. Night falls over Lindisfarne like a heavy velvet curtain, thick with shadows and the lingering chill of the North Sea. The monastery is quiet now, but the silence is tense, almost expectant, as though the stones themselves are holding their breath. You walk slowly along the corridors, careful not to disturb the fragile calm, feeling every creak of the floorboards like a secret whisper of the day's events. The monks and nuns have retreated to their cells, but sleep comes fitfully. Every creak of timber, every distant lap of waves against the rocks seems amplified, a reminder that peace is tenuous and vigilance is never truly optional. You lie awake on a thin mattress, listening to the soft rhythm of breaths around you, heart still echoing the adrenaline of earlier chaos. Some nuns maintain a quiet vigil, sitting by candles, reading, or whispering prayers that drift like incense through the dark. Their calm presence is strangely reassuring, a subtle assertion that the world has not entirely tipped into chaos. Even amidst exhaustion, their routines create a protective rhythm, as if the soft cadence of devotion can shield the island from future misfortune. Outside, the wind moves over the cliffs, tugging at robes and rattling shutters. You feel its cold fingers on your skin and imagine the longships lingering just beyond the horizon, patient and inscrutable. Sleep is a delicate negotiation. Eyes heavy, body weary, mind alert enough to notice every sound, every shadow that could signal danger or simply an overactive imagination. Your thoughts drift to the absurdity of the raid. Bread looted like gold, priceless relics ignored, a day that combined terror, chaos, and human whimsy into a single unforgettable episode. You quietly marvel at the persistence of humour even in tragedy, how humans cling to normalcy, jokes, and rituals as tiny shields against fear. Despite the lingering tension, there is also a sense of pride and quiet triumph. Lindisfarne has endured. Its people have preserved what they could, defended what they dared, and survived the day with astonishing resilience. You close your eyes, feeling the soft weight of exhaustion and relief, letting the knowledge that survival is possible, however tenuous, settle in. The night stretches long, stars hidden by clouds, the North Sea whispering its eternal secrets. You drift in and out of sleep, a mixture of unease and comfort, lulled by the rhythm of breathing, candlelight flickers, and distant waves. Every sound and shadow becomes part of a gentle meditation, a reminder that even after disruption, the world can still offer small, serene moments. By the end of the vigil, you find a balance between awareness and rest. The monastery sleeps cautiously, and you, along with its inhabitants, navigate the fragile line between wakefulness and slumber. Lindisfarne has survived another night, and in that endurance lies a quiet, satisfying reassurance that tomorrow, though uncertain, will still arrive. The first light of morning creeps over the horizon, painting Lindisfarne in soft, muted tones. Shadows stretch across the monastery's battered walls, revealing the aftermath in a gentle, almost painterly way. The air is crisp, tinged with salt from the North Sea and faint smoke from fires long since extinguished. You breathe in deeply, allowing the calm of dawn to wash over the tension that has clung to the island like a second skin. Monks and nuns emerge cautiously from their cells, moving with a quiet determination. The silence of the night is replaced by hushed footsteps, whispered observations, and the careful assessment of what survived. Broken furniture is righted, manuscripts gently restacked, and small repairs made with a combination of ingenuity and ritual precision. Even amid exhaustion, there is a rhythm to these actions, a soothing, deliberate cadence that reminds you that life goes on. The landscape itself seems to participate in the morning. Birds return to the cliffs, their soft chirping filling the air with a gentle, natural music. Waves lap against the shore with steady insistence, their sound a calming backdrop to the quiet rebuilding. Even the wind seems to pause for a moment, as if giving the island a breath before the day begins fully. You notice small, absurd triumphs. A manuscript that had fallen behind a shelf is retrieved intact. A loaf of bread found in a hidden corner is shared among the weary, and a nun's clever rearrangement of sacred objects prevents further chaos. Each tiny success feels disproportionately satisfying, a testament to human resourcefulness in the face of disorder. The monks begin their morning prayers, voices soft but steady, rising in unison to reclaim a sense of normalcy. The nuns join in, their tones blending with the distant call of the sea, creating a serene chorus that fills the battered halls. The ritual, unchanged by violence, offers comfort, structure, and an almost hypnotic calm. You walk through the monastery, observing their quiet resilience. Broken objects are noted but not mourned excessively. Losses are catalogued but not allowed to dominate the moment. Humour peeks through quietly. One monk whispers to another about Vikings' questionable taste, and a faint chuckle escapes despite fatigue. Even history's chaos cannot entirely erase the human capacity for wit. By mid-morning, the island feels alive again, not fully restored but stabilized. The day's light reveals both the damage and the perseverance, creating a balanced portrait of survival, courage, and absurdity. You realize that Lindisfarne has endured not only through faith, but through clever improvisation, subtle humor, and the stubborn persistence of its inhabitants. Dawn after the raid carries a quiet promise. Though the world may be unpredictable and even terrifying at times, there is resilience, order, and humanity tucked into every small recovery. You feel yourself settling into that calm, letting the rhythm of life returning to the monastery soothe your mind and allowing the soft humour of human survival to ease the lingering tension. With the morning fully upon Lindisfarne, the monks and nuns begin the delicate art of salvaging daily life. Broken chairs are righted, tables rearranged, and rooms tidied as if to coax normalcy back into the battered monastery. Every action is deliberate, a soft insistence that the world, though shaken, continues to turn. You move quietly alongside them, observing the gentle choreography of survival in motion. Meals are prepared with whatever remains. Bread is rationed carefully, soup stirred in heavy cauldrons that smell faintly of sea salt and scorched wood. You notice the subtle humour in the choices. One monk carefully slices a loaf that survived the raid, remarking that it tastes better when it's stolen back from history, prompting a suppressed chuckle from a nearby nun. Even amidst loss, small comforts and laughter persist. The ritual of washing and tending to personal hygiene returns, but in an improvisational form. Buckets of water are drawn from the well, rags scrub hands and faces, and monks carefully untangle robes that survive the chaos. The process is slow and methodical, yet soothing, each movement a quiet assertion that life, while disrupted, can still proceed with dignity and rhythm. Some attention turns to practical repairs. A cracked window is patched with parchment, a broken door reinforced with whatever wood is available, and sacred objects repositioned for safety. Every small act of restoration carries with it the subtle satisfaction of reclaiming control. You can't help but admire the ingenuity, how makeshift solutions and calm hands turn chaos into manageable order. The nuns supervise carefully, balancing resourcefulness with humour. One gently scolds a monk for attempting to carry too many items at once, while another whispers a quick joke about the Viking taste test committee. These understated moments of levity are a quiet balm, restoring morale without breaking the meditative rhythm of recovery. Outside, the island breathes a gentle, calming air. Waves lap the shore, gulls circle lazily overhead, and the wind carries faint hints of salt and herbs from the gardens. You notice that even nature participates in the quiet reclamation of order. The sun reflects softly on the water, and the cliffs stand steadfast, silent witnesses to human resilience. By mid-afternoon, the monastery hums softly with the quiet bustle of reclaimed routine. Tasks are accomplished not with urgency, but with care. Manuscripts restacked, floors swept, meals shared, and prayers offered. Every action is a testament to the determination to rebuild life, even when it feels absurd to measure normalcy against the recent chaos. In the calm of restored activity, you find yourself noticing details you might have overlooked before. The scent of fresh bread, the soft rustle of robes, the gentle rhythm of water being poured, the faint laughter echoing through the halls. Daily life has returned, albeit in a slightly altered, wiser form, and you feel the soothing rhythm wrap around you, a quiet reassurance that even after upheaval, life persists. As the day stretches on, a surprising layer of quiet humour begins to emerge among the monks and nuns. They move through the ruins with careful steps, tending to broken furniture, displaced manuscripts, and the odd puddle of water left by a misplaced bucket. In their whispered jokes and subtle gestures, you notice how absurdity can coexist with exhaustion and grief, softening the edges of fear and chaos. One monk peers at a shattered chest and mutters, "Well, that's one way to aerate your valuables," eliciting a small, suppressed chuckle from a nearby nun. Another notices a loaf of bread that somehow survived both the Vikings and the scurrying rats, and holds it up like a trophy, pretending it has miraculous healing properties. These moments of levity are almost ritualistic, providing relief without breaking the solemn rhythm of restoration. You notice that humour here is understated, dry, and strategic. It is not laughter that bursts uncontrollably, but the subtle acknowledgement that even in the most disruptive circumstances, human creativity and wit find a way to assert themselves. A monk carefully replaces a fallen manuscript, sighing, "I suppose it now comes with a complimentary Viking signature," and the surrounding nuns nod in silent wry agreement. The absurdity is often in the details. A Viking's dropped dagger becomes a mysterious artifact, a torn cloak, a fashion statement, and a toppled chair, a new kind of altar. By framing the chaos with humour, the monks and nuns regain a sense of agency, transforming the remnants of destruction into stories, jokes, and small triumphs over randomness. Outside, the North Sea continues its indifferent rhythm, waves rolling against the shore with steady consistency. You notice how the gentle sound of water seems to echo the quiet laughter inside, a reminder that the world continues beyond fear and destruction. Even the birds seem unbothered, hopping through the ruins with oblivious grace, a living metaphor for resilience and adaptability. In this gentle weaving of humour into recovery, you feel a subtle calm settling over you. The day's tension dissipates, replaced by a quiet warmth that comes from observing human ingenuity, endurance, and wit. The monks and nuns, though exhausted, demonstrate that even amidst devastation, the human spirit can find small, satisfying ways to assert normalcy and hope. By evening, the laughter is quieter, more reflective, but still present. A gentle joke here, a small smile there, a clever rearrangement of objects. All of it forms a soft, invisible scaffolding for emotional survival. You notice that this humour, so understated and precise, feels almost meditative, helping to stitch the day's events into something manageable, even teachable. Amid the ruins, you recognise the subtle power of this quiet humour. It is not just coping, it is reclaiming the day, the monastery, and in some small way, the narrative of survival. You breathe slowly, letting the rhythm of calm laughter and gentle reflection wrap around you. A comforting balm as the sun dips toward the horizon and the day quietly winds down. As twilight deepens, the monks and nuns begin the careful rituals of preparing for tomorrow. The day's chaos has passed, but the knowledge that the world remains unpredictable lingers in every shadow. You watch as they move with deliberate care, organising supplies, securing doors, and gently stacking manuscripts. Every action is purposeful, a quiet assertion that order, however fragile, can be reclaimed. Buckets of water are set aside, candles replenished, and tools for both work and repair arranged neatly. Meals are planned with careful foresight, rationed so that even if supplies are scarce, the community can survive another day. You notice the subtle meditative rhythm of these preparations, hands moving steadily, whispers of coordination, and the occasional soft joke to lighten the tension. Some nuns check sacred objects one last time, ensuring they are secure and unharmed. One quietly mutters about the Vikings' eccentric taste, eliciting a small knowing smile from her neighbour. Humour, you realise, has become an essential tool for both endurance and focus. It softens fear while sharpening attention, blending practicality with a gentle reminder that absurdity is part of life's fabric. The monks move through corridors like shadows, performing small tasks, reinforcing shelves, checking windows, and quietly tending the infirm or exhausted. You notice how even minor acts, tying a loose rope, repositioning a chair, carry a comforting weight. Each careful movement is a bridge between the day's chaos and the potential calm of tomorrow, a rhythm that feels soothing to witness. Outside, the North Sea continues its steady pulse, indifferent to human affairs, yet oddly comforting in its consistency. The wind rustles the monastery gardens, carrying faint hints of salt, herbs, and earth. You feel the quiet interplay between the outside world's permanence and the interior's carefully maintained routines. There is a soft reassurance in this rhythm, a reminder that life moves forward even when history presses uncomfortably close. By the time the night fully descends, final preparations are complete. Candles flicker in windows, doors are secured, and the last checks are made on treasured objects. The monastery, though scarred, exudes a fragile serenity, a balance between vigilance and rest, preparedness and relaxation. You notice the sense of quiet pride among the monks and nuns, a subtle acknowledgement that they have endured, adapted, and found stability amidst upheaval. You settle into a nearby corner, letting your breath slow and your mind absorb the gentle cadence of restoration. There is satisfaction in observing these careful acts, a soft, almost hypnotic reassurance that tomorrow will arrive, and when it does, the monastery and you will still be ready. Lindisfarne sleeps under the watchful stars, protected by careful hands, sharp minds, and a touch of understated humour. Night has fully settled over Lindisfarne, the monastery bathed in a soft, silvery glow under a sky scattered with stars. The air is cool, carrying whispers of the North Sea, distant waves, and the faint scent of herbs from the gardens. Inside, Candles flicker softly, casting gentle shadows across stone walls and wooden beams. Everything feels slower now, quieter, deliberate, a sanctuary of calm after a day that teetered between chaos and absurdity. Monks and nuns move silently through the halls, performing last-minute checks. A manuscript tucked securely, a door latched, a candle placed just so. Their steps are measured, careful, and soothingly rhythmic. You notice how these motions, repeated and deliberate, create a comforting pattern, like a lullaby in stone and mortar. Each small action asserts control, reassures the mind, and signals that life, though fragile, persists. You observe subtle humour lingering even in these quiet moments. A monk nudges a slightly crooked chair back into place, whispering, "Vikings will be judged for bad posture," and a nearby nun lets out a soft, amused sigh. The gentle absurdity of human thought persists, easing the weight of memory, allowing a soft smile to emerge even in the aftermath of terror. The monastery seems to exhale. The heavy tension of the day has softened, replaced by this delicate calm. Windows rattle lightly with the wind. Distant gulls call to each other, and the faint pulse of the sea is a rhythmic backdrop, like the slow heartbeat of the island itself. You take it in slowly, noticing every sound, every shadow, every subtle movement. Even in the quiet, vigilance remains. You see nuns settling in, monks stretching out on simple mats, all breathing in unison with the rhythm of night. The world feels expansive and safe, if only temporarily, and the gentle order of routine provides a subtle reassurance that tomorrow, too, can be faced with dignity, wit, and resilience. As you sink into your own rest, eyes heavy, you notice how far the day has come. Chaos has passed, absurdity has been endured, small triumphs have been claimed, and life continues. The monks and nuns, tireless and quietly heroic, provide a soft, steady presence. Their calm, humour, and resourcefulness echo in your mind. A lullaby composed of human persistence, gentle wit, and slow, rhythmic breathing. Nightfall wraps the monastery in its serene cloak. You settle into that calm, letting the soft cadence of restored order, understated humour, and quiet reflection envelop you. Lindisfarne sleeps. The North Sea hums its eternal song, and you, witness to history's chaos and human resilience, drift gently toward rest.